Bush Skills, a look at life in the bush earlier this century, retold by the remarkable characters who lived there.
But sharp. You sharp. Oi, oi.
The following scenes depict a various range of skills as practiced as part of life in the bush in bygone days. They're being demonstrated by the few remaining older people who know how. When they go, these wonderful skills go with them. Fortunately, in their own words, you're about to see these real people enacting their trades, as was their usual practice in the past.
Back. Come on. Come on. Oi. Oi.
Bullock drivers control and direct their animals by voice only and the occasional flick of the whip. Much patience and skill is required to train these animals to respond without using reins, and a wonderful understanding develops between man and beast.
Oi. Whoop. Whoop it, spot back. Whoop it. G-toya. G-toya. Wait, move bounce. Me, wait, me. Dropper. G-dropper. Wait.
Once the bullocks have pulled a suitable log to a convenient working place, it can be split for use in the construction of a post and rail fence.
It depends on the log, how good a splitter it is, but you split it from the small end and you split it from the top, get a split right through the end of the log, and you keep on following from there. You must put wedges in the bottom to open the bottom of your log, because that's laying on the ground, you can't get at it. So you've got to get the bottom open and then just follow along with your wedges.
Oh, you've got a lot more better than me.
From then on, you've got your log in two halves.
Beautiful job.
Then, all through your log, from when you start on your log, you halve your timber. You keep on halving your timber till you get down to the finished object. Your heart is waste timber, that's thrown away. So you're allowed to stick your axe in there. If you stick it in on the outside of your log or anywhere, you'll damage the timber. Then when you split it, it comes along to where that axe mark is, and instead of going where you want it, it'll probably follow that axe mark. I prefer the adze for doing rails. You can do them with axe, but you've got to have something to hold them if you do them with axe, because you want your rails sitting up on the edge. With the adze, you do them on their flat, so therefore they stop in place better. If you use an adze and you point it towards your legs, you'll cut your leg for sure. You mightn't cut it today, but you'll cut it tomorrow. So you don't stand with your legs in front of the adze. You always give it room to go through between your legs or past the outside of your legs. But a little chip will get stuck on the blade, and instead of biting into the wood, it'll just skip off the wood into your legs. So you don't hit it towards your legs.
I think that'll be a good fence post for a rail fence. It's supposed to be 7 inches wide. This one's a little bit wider, but that doesn't matter. I think it'd be quite a good post. Take a little bit off there. That's right, he's not much over 7 inches. That's what he's got to be, so I think he'll be quite all right.
Before erecting a post and rail fence, the posts have to be bored and mortised out, enabling the rails to be neatly fitted.
The post's got to be held solid so that he doesn't move about. You can't bore him if he's jumping about. 2 little screws here to tighten him up. I think that'll do. Now we'll slide him back. Right, now this auger goes in here. This is a 2-inch auger. Goes in there. And I'll tie this little thing down to hold him down so that he don't jump about. Now we proceed to bore the hole. We're through. Yep, I think that'll do.
The hole is dug neatly and square down the side, just big enough to enable a rammer to work between the post and side of the hole.
You right? Shove your post a bit. Whoop. Oh, wait on. Right. Got him?
Yep.
All right. Whoop. Oh, and shove your post a bit. Yep.
Each rail,
Yep.
he's got a taper, but he's also got a shoulder on him, and when you put them in the post, they wedge up together and they're tight. That makes them tight when you wedge them in the post.
Right, now we've got to take the bottom of the post back in there a bit. Yep, I think that'll do. You all right? Just shove him away from you a little bit. Whoa, too much. Whoa, just away from your fraction. Whoa, beautiful. That's right. Got to put these chocks in here to push the rail over on the post underneath the hole, like that. Another one goes in there. Now, these chocks that I've driven in from the back are to push the rail over on this side of the post so that it lines the post up so as the next rail will go in that hole and it will be in line. It won't have a twist on the post. Now that looks good.
You can see this fence on Claude Road near Sheffield in northwest Tasmania. Snaring was one of the traditional bush skills and involved setting snares, making the snares themselves, and drying and preparing skins.
Snaring is now totally prohibited. However, years ago, it was an important traditional winter occupation, providing a livelihood for many country families who used the meat and received the money from the sale of the furs.
Oh, you got to run up, see where he goes up? See where he's tore all the bark off?
And what do you put the pole up for?
for him to run up. I've got to cut a little peg to go in there now, and I'll set the snare on it. Put this peg in here to you open you have a split in the top of that peg. You open it and jam the snare in there tight. That's got to be tight in there, so as when he hits it, it'll go around his neck. And you have him about 1.5 inches off the pole here, so as his chin just goes over it and you get him with the neck. And then you, this tie, that's 2.5 inches. And it don't matter how cold your hands are or how frosty or anything it is, it's always easy undone. There's a good run there, I'll set him. Couple of teeth through here, I'll get a springer here, I'll get a couple here. I'll set another one. I'll have him too.
Everything is made up on the snare line where possible. However, sometimes the springers have to be carried quite a long way when suitable tea tree is unavailable nearby.
He's a bit long for a springer. I'll get a couple of pegs out the butt of him. I always like tea tree. They won't stop bent when you get the weather on them. I reckon a man that they call these, and I reckon any man that can average his 50 a day, he's doing a pretty good job. Just to cut your springers and do the lot. I'll cut a treadle out of this for a foot snare. All these snares I'm going to set, there's probably a half a dozen different ways of setting them. You always cut him off where he's got a little fork on him or a sprout or something, and then when you tie your snare on him, he's got something to stop him from slipping off. Now I'll drive him in here, drive my peg in. Ground's pretty solid too. You have that down 2 fingers, top of that niche, look. So as when you put your treadle in, you've got clearance all the way underneath. That's your treadle. It's most important that you got him nice and clear, and you have him trim a bit off him so as he slides up and down your peg nice and free. That's your button string. That's your snare. You put him out, set him out around he goes out around there. Set him out on the ground like that. And you always set these where there's something on each side of that. So you jump there, and he jumps on your treadle next. That's how he gets caught. Now this is your springer. It's most important that you have him nice and solid in the ground. I'll bend him over. He goes right over onto the top of this peg. I tie my button on. That's done with those 2.5 niche knots what I told you about before. You just bend him down and put him down there. And that's him. You tie your snare on then, and that's done with the same knot, the 2 half hitches. And you just make sure that snare is spread out nice and clear on the ground. Well, the root comes along here, and as soon as he lands on that, it releases the button. This is a real kangaroo snare. He's no good for anything else. He's got a split in the top of him. Open him with your axe. You jam your snare in him, and it's important to have that tight. So as when he hits it, it's tight enough to run up on him and hold him. This is your drag. You got to have that something pretty solid so as he can't drag it too far away. That's the tail of your snare, that, off the wire. Call that the tail, and that goes onto your drag. And you got him. And he just goes straight through there, and that's it. This is what you call a cowbell necker. I reckon he's the best snare that was ever invented. He's sure, and everything what goes along, he'll catch it. I think I might be in trouble here with a stone. Yeah, you're right. And in the snow, you don't have a lot of trouble with them in the snow. Foot snares and that, you get a lot of trouble with brung snares. But with these, you don't have a lot of trouble. That's your snare again. You run him through the eye. They're all old genuine hemp snares, they are. You can't buy that now. You loop him, put a loop on him, and that's your head stick. He goes on your head stick. Run him along the top of your head stick, and he goes in there like that. And that's him. Bring your springer down, tie him onto your springer. And that springer on a necker, I always like them to go right across the top of those pegs. And that makes it more, makes a game or anything, it's got a bob under that then. And you go straight into the snare. Half inch knots again. And that snare there, that's the most important thing on this snare, is to have that pulling straight. It's got to pull straight up. If you got him back, pulling back or pulling that way, he'll spring himself. He goes along there, and when he hits the bottom of that, up she goes.
The snarer's life is hard. Daytime tending the snares, usually 2 or 3 lines of several hundred spread over many miles. In the hut, a fire burns on the earthen floor to help dry the skins. And time is fully utilised in the evening, preparing meals, taking down the dry skins and pegging out the green ones.
He put his front legs up first. About 9.5 inches apart, or 10 inches a big one. And his back legs. That's got to be straight. Same down that side. And you just square his sides up. Now you pull his head up. By doing that, you don't give him a real long, skinny looking head when he's dry. The main thing with them is not to have them real tight. You stretch them, you open the fur up as far as the thickness of the fur. Put one end of his tail now. And up his behind, open his tail out so as he'll dry out well. A lot don't do that. They turn their tail inside out. A lot of buyers years ago, they wouldn't buy them if their tails wasn't pegged out like this. And now they prefer them with their tails turned inside out. But I still peg them the old way. And you've got to take all this loose fat and meat off. If you don't, when they put them in tan, if you left that on there, when that won't dry under there, when you put it in tan, all the fur will come out. That's not bad put in your pot of stew, this is what you cut off. Gives it a bit of extra flavour.
When dried, the skins are usually first threaded onto a wire back to back to complete the drying process before being stacked.
That's the old type imp we used to use. We used to put 6 balls of that in a billy can, and you'd have your 6 strands out and you'd run them out to your machine and double it. Well, now you can't buy that. We haven't been able to buy that old type for years. But I got some here, and there's 5 strands of imp in that one single strand. Well, we'll use that. Righto, Ned. Go as fast as you like with it. Hello. That's half your snare. Now I'll just run this up myself. Tie a knot in that end of him. Now this eye, it's an old eye, what they call the bowline knot. And there's a lot of people I've tried to learn to tie it, make that, but there's not too many can tie that knot. And that's your wallaby snare. When you get 50 or 100 of them made, you get a kerosene tin and you put a bit of celery bark in them and boil it and wait your dish and put that in celery bark while it's warm. It's got to be dead cold. If you put that in celery bark when it's warm, you get over that and just pull it all, rots it.
Yes.
But with the celery bark, it makes that nice and tan. It's beautiful stuff to tan with. That snare, if he was left like that, well, firstly he frightens the game for more than what this one would, because this one's dark. But he'd last perhaps 5 or 6 years like that. Well, this one, you'd get 14 or 15 years out of him being tan with the celery bark.
Wire and hemp snares were also made in the snarers' huts at night time. Coils of brass wire were purchased for this purpose. The gauge and the number of strands depends on whether the snares were used for catching kangaroos or possums. Brass is ideal because it's soft and pliable and doesn't break every time it's kinked.
You just twist them around and out, and then they'll roll in when you start to spin it. That's that. You just twist that around, that loose stuff. Twist that around the end of him there. The eye's already made in him. Just open him a bit and he goes back through there, and there's your wire snare.
Snarers took great pride and spent much time in the preparation of their furs for sale at the end of the season. There was keen rivalry, each snarer wanting to have the best.
This is the best fur of the lot. This little fella, he's a little wallaby. I'll give him a bit of a rough brush up, and look at the tip on that. You see the tip, how the tip shines on that? That's the best fur in the mountains, I reckon. Look at the pelt on it, how clean the pelt, that side, the pelt is. That's a fur. That size was always classed as a fur. When you got bigger than that, well, they went as tanners. The best possums we used to get in there years ago was in the end of May. They start squeezing in the rocks and in little holes in pine trees and that, gum trees, anything they can get in, and when they squeeze through that into a tight hole, they take all that tip off. They look rough then. When you put your fingers in it, look, see, you bury your fingers in his fur. He's not a bad little possum for lowland. He wasn't caught away up. There was no poaching and buggering around on one another's runs them times. You all knew where their boundaries was and used to set right as a snare. Take the game out, and one another's snare and hang up in a tree. They spend hours and days after they come out of the mountain brushing them up and, you know, cleaning them up and making them look nice. God, you get paid too.
Merv and Bill Yude are names well known in Tasmania. In fact, between them, they've won most of the world's chopping championships. Here, they demonstrate how to square sleepers using the broadaxe.
Squaring sleepers on a contract basis was one way of earning a living and was widely practiced some years ago. It was done in the bush and didn't require any expensive machinery. All that was needed was a crosscut saw, axes and maul and wedges, and sometimes an old tractor to pull the logs to a convenient place to work. Logs needed to be straight-grained, even in size, and usually not too big so they could be easily handled. They were halved or quartered to get sleeper size of 9 inches by 5 inches and 7 feet long. As is usual, the log is opened with wedges from the small end, care being taken to ensure that when the log opens, it runs straight thereby not spoiling the next billet.
I'm just getting a bit of black here to make a paste, you see, to make a line up the sleeper. And we use a string line, that's the string in there, and that'll soak the black in like a chalk and makes a fairly good line. And that's the old way of doing it, you know, in the bush. Yeah, they've always done it that way. I'm just marking the sleeper out, the square of it. It's 9 by 5, you see. And chalk it out, and then we put lines on it to get our angles up the sides and the flats.
One old skill practiced was the way the sleeper was actually marked out ready for squaring. The end was first marked, usually using a block representing sleeper size, and then 2 pieces of string soaked in a mixture of charcoal and water were stretched tight from end to end, lifted and let go to spring back, clearly marking the correct dimensions for squaring. With the billet lying firmly on a solidly constructed platform and clearly marked, an axe is used to notch the edges and roughly trim off the surplus wood. This is followed by the broad axe, which, because of its shape, enables its operator to quickly square off its edges with a smooth finish. The broad axe is longer and flat on one side, which holds it into the wood.
With the squaring axe, they're offset so that they protect your knuckles when you're squaring down the side of the sleepers. You don't knock your knuckles. They're sharpened like a chisel, you know, ordinary chisel, and that's to keep your sleeper nice and square. And they got a 12-inch blade on them, and when you hit, once you get your eye in, you hit, you cover quite a bit of wood in a straight line.
Nowadays, the old trade of squaring sleepers in the bush has faded out, and broad axes have almost become museum pieces. Bill Youde's specialty in competition chopping is tree felling. Aged 54, he has won the World Championship in Sydney 9 times and the Australian Championship in Melbourne 19 times. A truly remarkable achievement.
You know, the bush is full of many wonderful characters, and this man is one of them.
Alf Waters has lived a tough life in the bush, but nevertheless has taught himself many skills, one of which is playing the piano accordion. He's also well known as a hut builder and shingle splitter, and over the years has given many demonstrations at shows all over the state. Alf and his brother falling a king billy pine tree 8 feet in diameter and 45 feet to the first limb in 1934. Alf holding an axe he made from a bulldozer spring. He also made the handle. Cutting a footblock with a homemade axe at the Chudley show, aged 85.
I'll show you what you do. Look, there's 4 strands.
Right.
Down to there.
Right.
Where? Yes, down to there.
Right.
Well then, that leaves them strands strong. Terrible lot of whips break here. That's the weakest part, and it's up near the handle where they got all the strength on them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, instead of making fine strands, I put 4 strands in, plait the 4 down to there, and then I split the other strands, the 4 strands, and that makes 8.
Ah.
Well, then I go on with 8 strands, as you can see, look.
Yeah.
And then I get down to about here. I'm down to 6 there. That's where I drop, down to 6 strands. Then I come well down with 6 strands. There. I drop to 4 there.
Oh, never. Now, how do you...
And that leaves your tailier strands. Now, you've got those little thin strands, and you eat a bit of grit or anything. You don't like a strand of cotton as saying this. And you eat a bit of grit, anything a bit sharp, you'll cut a strand. When you cut one strand, you've got to unplait the, or well up past it, to join them back in again. Just
Slice another one in?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I cut that out, I take the hair off it. I cut it out in 4 strands, I take the hair off it. I put it in water, cold water, and I soak it for about 12 or 14 hours or something like that. Then I take it out and I got a block and rope out there and I stretch
Noticed
it,
that.
every bit of stretch that's in it. Then I dry it. Then I take it, you over to the fence. I've got a flat file rope with a post and I rub the strands off and take round it and take the flinching off. Rub the flinching off. Then I pair my strands to what I want them and go and platen. I like for the tail, right on the fine tail, get the fat doe skin, they're the toughest. Or a fat wallaby skin. A fat wallaby skin's tougher than a roo skin.
Is it?
And if you can get a cat skin, he's tougher than a wallaby skin. Just do an ordinary cat.
With paling knife, axe and Tango his dog, Alf Walters, shingle splitter, snarer, track cutter, hut builder, whipmaker, bootmaker and blacksmith. Prisoner of war Singapore, a remarkable identity.
In days gone by, bushmen had to be able to split timber for many uses, including shingles for roofing. But first, they had to find the right tree. Some idea of whether a tree will split can be assessed by the look of the bark and the limbs on the head of the tree. A likely tree can be tested.
Well, you take the bark off and you split it like that. And if it splits, the tree's good. And if the bark don't split, and the tree, see the flat in that, that's no good. But you mustn't chip the tree because it ruins the wood, lets the grubs in, and then the fire gets into it. You just take a bit of bark off like this, and that don't interfere with the wood. This is a far better tree, this one. You see how the bark splits? Well, the wood splits. And that's why you don't have to chip the tree.
Having selected a good splitting tree, it's fallen and blocked up into appropriate lengths, depending on whether posts, rails, palings or shingles are required. A narrow long blade on a strong handle is used for splitting. This is tapped into the wood using a wooden mallet, which doesn't damage the paling knife. For shingles, the block is split into convenient-sized billets for handling. A suitable support is made to hold the billet while being split. The shingles are then peeled off using the handle of the paling knife as a lever.
Seven-inch paling, what they used to use to put on the houses in the early days, like weatherboards they do now. Fence ones are narrower ones. You got to get fair halfway across, fair across the grain. You see how he's going a bit that way, you bring him over and put the weight on the other side. And that's brought him back to the size. Just straighten them out, they've got a bit of a twist in them, and we straighten them and put a weight on them, and that flattens them out straight.
What sort of weight? Does the weight of them hold them down themselves?
No, I generally put a post or something on top of them, just a bit extra weight, and it brings them out straight.
Do they have to dry out now or before they can be used?
Yes, all the better. A lot of people put them on fresh, but they're better left to dry out for so long.
How long should they last for untreated?
Oh, well, anything up to 100 years.
Well, bushmen had to be able to turn their hands to many tasks. Here, Henry Steers shows us his skill in the blacksmith shop.
Years ago, before the days of gas and welders, most large properties of necessity had a blacksmith shop where general farm smithy work was done. This could be sharpening tools, fitting horseshoes, making gate hinges and general work to be done using the forge.
It's got to be that nice bright colour, more than a red. A deep red is not quite enough. Then if you get it too hot, it'll go white. The welding heat is just before the burning. Just before it starts to burn is the welding heat. It's got to be very, very hot to weld. When your iron's on the point of melting. See that stuff flying off it? Yeah. I'm hoping it'll be a jews harp. A jews harp is an adjustment for a chain. A lot of the old bullockys and horsemen used them. And they're really, if you're in amongst bullocks and horses, they are an essential piece of equipment. So that's what I'm going to try to make, but it might be like the old Scotsman. The bloke walked into the shed and he said, "What are you making, sir?" And he said, "Well, I don't know," he said. "It might come to something," he said. "It might come to an axe or it might come to a mattock." So he said, "I'll have it for whatever it comes to." So that's ready to weld. I think I'll add a little bit to my fire. That's charcoal. Nearly all the blacksmiths use coke, but I find with charcoal it gives you a good clean fire. You can weld with it. You'll get a lot of clinker that comes off the coke or the coal, and that gets in your fire. And if you get that in the bottom of your fire, you can't get anything hot. That takes all the heat out of your fire. So you've got to make sure that you've got a clean fire and keep poking that out if you get any of it in there. I make it in a 44-gallon drum. With get a bit of good dry wood. It's got to be dry, stringy bark or peppermint, and cut it up so it'll go in a 44-gallon drum, and burn it. You have a hole in the bottom and the top open. Then you let it burn till it comes to charcoal, and then I have a lid I slap over the top and I upend it and seal it off. Then seal all the holes up with clay. And that puts it out. But you've got to, there's a knack in doing that, you've got to know when to seal it off, because it won't burn anymore if your wood's not all burnt. Well, when you seal it off, there won't be any more burn. But it's quite an effective way of making charcoal. A little bit more closer together. There we are. That is what we call a jews harp. It's an adjustment for a chain used by the old bullockys and the old horse drivers. It was an essential thing. You see the chain fits in there like that. There's no way that it'll let go. So therefore, it's essential to have one of those. If you go in the bush without it, you won't do much good.
Henry demonstrates what the sparks do when iron is overheated and burns.
When it burns, you'll see them little three-cornered sort of sparks coming out of it, and that's when you burn it. Well, that's ruined your piece of iron if you burn it. Ruins the texture of it, and it's not much good for iron that's been burnt. There's not much good for anything really, not after that.
Peter Carter is another bushman with many talents and shares his knowledge of smoke-drying skins and prospecting.
Snarers' huts were in the high country, where the animals had the best furs to withstand the inclement winter weather. To get these good furs, the life in remote camps, which were the winter homes of these men, was a hard one. They worked in extremely severe conditions, demanding tremendous stamina and perseverance, at times taking human endurance to its limit.
To peg the skins out on this here, light a small fire, not a big fire, but have plenty of smoke coming from it, and it smoke dried your skins. And then after you got them 3 parts dried, we'd take them off and put the skin down, the fur up, hanging on these, flat, for a few hours, and they'd dry them. They would finish drying them, smoke dry them. And it kept more weight in your skins too when you went to sell them. And when it come a fine day, a real fine weather, we'd been about About the second week in August, and it come a nice fine day, you got them all out in the sun. And kept that up, flicking them, and get them right up to the best. They look the best then. But this is the only way you could do it, and I don't think there'll be another old drying shed left in the state. And I tell you what, we all had yellow hair from the smoke. Our hair went yellow, you could always pick it out. You search your riverbed for any ironstones or quartz or sand. Now, there's an indication of the mineral in this stream. Well, this here is the sulfides of lead and silver, old sulfides, and it all mixed together. On this side here, there's a small seam of fine gold. And here is the ironstone, which are very important to look for. Rusty ironstone, always it's a great indication of metals. The first thing you done all for there was search your creek beds. First your streams, all streams, small ones, how big they are, for gold. And when you got one with it in, you knew, you followed it, it come from somewhere. And then you come onto the outcrop. And I walked up Southwell Creek till we come onto the outcrops of it, of this Southwell Creek, which was under Mount Charter. It wasn't named the Hellier then, it was named the Macintosh. And half those creeks weren't even named at all under Mount Charter. But the creeks was an indication of your ore body. Under Mount Charter, this is what I come up with. And I found this reef over about 25 years ago. That's the lode, and this is the indication of the sulfites and iron. Right. Now I'm looking for the gold, what's in the rock, by breaking this corn run. Traces of little small fine gold in it like pepper, very, very alluvial. And you crush that up, you get a nice lot of gold out of it. Well, as you go, you rub your hand, you throw all the rubbish, what's no good out of it, like that. And then you work your way, look, so you just let that run out very wet, and you do it again. And the heavy metal will always go to the bottom of your pan. The metal was no good, will just go straight out. And you keep putting it out and putting it out and putting it out. The metal stops on the corner, it won't leave the pan, all the rubbish will. And there's your fine, real fine gold right in your dish. And there's the silver lead.
Many remarkable characters lived and worked in the high country, including Peter Carter's father, Maff. His friends erected this memorial, which highlights his many talents. His hut is nearby, and this scene reflects the typically harsh winter conditions he would have experienced in the high country. In these extreme conditions, stockyards were built out of the heavy logs available. Many miles of chock and log fencing were constructed by hand in the same manner, using lighter timber. A group of old bushmen reminisce around the fire, swapping yarns and offering good advice before demonstrating how to build one of these stockyards.
See how that axe is sticking in that log? I want to always see it sticking in there. I don't want it laying on the ground. I nearly cut a bullock's foot off once, you know.
The bottom log is pulled at the site by bullocks and then rolled precisely into place using a cant dog. To build the panels up, chocks have to be cut just long enough to cross the logs at the end. These in turn are notched with an axe to allow the next log to drop into place. Chocks are generally cut with a cross-cut saw, and two men are able to lift them into place.
That's right.
Rolling chains are placed under the ends of the logs and hooked back onto the bullocks. Forward motion by the bullocks will roll the log up into place.
Will that be right there, Al?
Yes, it'll be right.
The bullocks need to be backed close to the panel on the opposite side to hook the chain on, and there needs to be plenty of room for the animals to move forward, enabling the log to be rolled right up into its place on the panel. Care must be taken to guide the log up the skids evenly. As the bullocks move forward with the chain attached, the log rolls up the skids. Great control is needed to prevent the bullocks from pulling the log too far. If one end of the log is thicker than the other, it will gain, and the small end is barred forward to catch up.
Whoa! Beautiful job.
Bit further. He'll drop in, Moody.
Many of these bush skills are sadly no longer practiced, but this video helps to keep the spirit and traditions of these legendary characters alive, and as a tribute to them, their lives, and the skills they've shown us.